This haunted house in Texas still screams at night. Nobody in Millbrook, Texas talks about the old Henderson house after dark. It sits at the end of Oakwood Drive, a two-story farmhouse with peeling white paint and shutters hanging crooked like broken teeth. During the day, it looks sad and forgotten, just another abandoned property waiting to be torn down. But when the sun sets and the stars come out, that house starts screaming. Real human screams that echo across the fields and make dogs howl from 3 miles away. I'm telling you this story because I lived in that house for 42 days, and I barely made it out alive. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and last summer I moved to Millbrook with my 10-year-old son Danny after my divorce. The house was cheap, way too cheap, but I was desperate and broke. The realtor kept talking fast, pushing papers at me, eager to close the deal. I should have known something was wrong when she wouldn't meet my eyes. We moved in on a Friday in June, when the Texas heat made the air shimmer like water. Danny loved the big backyard and the tire swing hanging from an old oak tree. I loved that I could finally afford to give him a real home, even if it needed work. That first night we ordered pizza, unpacked boxes, and fell asleep exhausted on our mattresses on the floor. Everything seemed perfect. Everything seemed normal. At 3:17 a.m. I woke up to screaming. Not Danny's voice, not my voice, but a woman's scream coming from somewhere inside the house. It was a sound of pure terror, the kind of scream that makes your blood freeze. I grabbed my phone and ran to Danny's room, but he was sound asleep, undisturbed. The screaming lasted maybe 20 seconds, then stopped as suddenly as it started. I searched every room, every closet, every corner, nothing, nobody. The next morning I convinced myself I'd been dreaming, stress from the move, exhaustion, imagination playing tricks. Danny was cheerful at breakfast, talking about exploring the property. I didn't mention the screaming. Why scare him over a bad dream? But that night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., it happened again. The same woman's scream, the same bone-chilling terror, the same sudden stop. This time I was wide awake. This time I knew it was real. I went to our neighbor's house the next day, an older woman named Mrs. Chen who'd lived on Oakwood Drive for 30 years. When I mentioned the screaming, her face went pale. She invited me in, made tea with shaking hands, and told me about Elizabeth Henderson. Elizabeth had lived in my house in 1982 with her husband Robert. One night in July, neighbors heard terrible screaming coming from the Henderson property. When police arrived, they found Robert sitting calmly in the kitchen. Elizabeth was never found. Mrs. Chen leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Robert claimed she'd run off with another man, but nobody believed him. There was evidence of a struggle in the bedroom, scratches on the walls, a broken mirror. But without a body, they couldn't charge him with anything more than assault. He spent 2 years in prison, got out and disappeared. That house has been screaming Elizabeth's name ever since. Every night at 3:17 a.m., the exact time she vanished. I felt sick to my stomach. I'd moved my son into a house where a woman had possibly been murdered, but I couldn't afford to move again. I'd signed a year lease and spent every penny I had on the deposit. Mrs. Chen saw the panic in my eyes. Some people can live with it, she said softly. Some families make it work. They wear earplugs, take sleeping pills, try to ignore it. But children... She paused, looking troubled. Children hear things adults can't. They see things we've learned to ignore. Keep a close eye on your boy. That night I told Danny we were playing a game. We'd both wear earplugs to bed, and whoever slept through until morning without taking them out would win a prize. He thought it was silly, but agreed. I lay in bed, earplugs in, watching the clock tick toward 3:17 a.m. Even through the foam plugs I heard it, muffled but unmistakable, a woman screaming like she was being torn apart. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the walls themselves. In the morning, Danny was quiet at breakfast. He pushed his cereal around the bowl without eating. Finally, he looked up at me with scared eyes. Mom, I took the earplugs out last night. I heard the screaming lady, but that's not what scared me. He paused, and I could see him fighting tears. After she stopped screaming, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They stopped outside my door, and Mom, someone tried to open it. I wanted to pack our bags right then and leave, but where would we go? I had no money, No family nearby, no options. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do after years of struggling as a single mother. I got practical. I bought locks for all the bedroom doors, installed motion sensor lights in the hallways, and set up my old laptop to record video at night. If something was happening in this house, I was going to document it. The video from that first night showed nothing unusual until 3:17 a.m. Then the camera started glitching, the image breaking apart into static. When it cleared, I could see the hallway outside Danny's room, empty. But the handle on his door was turning slowly, deliberately, like someone was testing to see if it was locked. The handle turned left, then right, then left again. After 30 seconds, it stopped. The hallway remained empty. Whatever was trying to get into my son's room was invisible. I started researching Elizabeth Henderson obsessively. I found old newspaper articles from 1982, police reports, court documents. Elizabeth had been 28 years old, a teacher at the local elementary school, loved by everyone who knew her. Robert was controlling, jealous, with a history of anger issues. Witnesses reported hearing them argue frequently in the weeks before she disappeared. The night she vanished, neighbors heard her screaming, "Please, no, Robert, please." Then silence. One article mentioned something that made my skin crawl. The police had searched the property thoroughly, including digging up the backyard. They'd found nothing. But the house had a basement that Robert claimed was sealed off years ago due to flooding. Police checked it briefly but found it empty except for standing water and old junk. They never searched it thoroughly. I realized with growing horror that I'd never actually seen a basement in my house. There was no door, no entrance. But that didn't mean it wasn't there. I called a local contractor to come inspect the house, claiming I wanted to check the foundation. He was a gruff man named Tom, who'd lived in Millbrook his whole life. When he saw the address, he almost refused the job. "You know about that place?" he asked. I told him I did, and that's why I needed his help. He agreed, but only if we worked during daylight hours. He refused to set foot on the property after dark. Tom brought ground-penetrating radar equipment and scanned beneath the house. What he found made him stop and stare at his monitor. "There's definitely a basement under here," he said. "A big one. And the floor plans filed with the county show it was sealed up in 1981, a year before that woman disappeared. Someone closed off all the entrances and filled them with concrete." He looked at me seriously. "You want my advice? Whatever's down there should stay down there. Some doors are closed for a reason, but I couldn't let it go. Elizabeth Henderson deserved better than to be forgotten. Buried under my house, screaming for help for 40 years. I needed to know the truth." That night, after Danny was asleep with his door locked, I went into the master bedroom closet. I'd noticed the floor there sounded hollow when you walked on it. Using a crowbar, I pried up the floorboards. Beneath them was concrete, but the concrete was newer, rougher than the rest of the foundation. Someone had filled in something here. I spent 3 hours chipping away at that concrete with a hammer and chisel, trying to be quiet so I wouldn't wake Danny. Finally, I broke through. Below was darkness, and a smell that made me gag. Old, stale air mixed with something sweet and rotten. I shined my flashlight down into a hole barely wide enough for a person to fit through. The light revealed stairs leading down into blackness. I'd found the entrance to the sealed basement. Every rational part of my brain told me not to go down there. Wait for morning. Call the police. Don't investigate a possible crime scene alone at night. But something pulled at me, something urgent and desperate. I could almost feel Elizabeth down there waiting, needing someone to finally find her. At 2:45 a.m., 32 minutes before the nightly screaming would start, I lowered myself through the hole and climbed down the stairs. The basement was larger than the house above it, extending out under the backyard. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing old furniture covered in mold, cardboard boxes dissolved into mush, and standing water that reflected my light like a black mirror. And then I saw her. In the far corner, partially submerged in the water, was a skeleton still wearing the rotted remains of a nightgown. Elizabeth Henderson had been down here the entire time, just feet below where families had lived and slept, and tried to ignore her screaming. I should have climbed back up immediately and called the police. but something kept me frozen, staring at those bones. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the screaming started. But this time, I was standing right next to its source. The sound didn't come from the skeleton itself, but from the very air around it, like the basement had recorded that terrible night and been playing it back ever since. The scream wasn't just sound. It was emotion, raw and overwhelming. Elizabeth's final moments of terror and betrayal trapped in this space forever. I felt tears streaming down my face as I listened. This wasn't a ghost trying to scare people. This was a woman who'd been murdered by someone she trusted, hidden away like garbage, and forgotten by the world. The screaming wasn't meant to frighten. It was meant to be heard, to be acknowledged, to remind the living that Elizabeth Henderson had existed and her life had mattered. I climbed back up those stairs and called 911. The police came at dawn. They recovered Elizabeth's remains and reopened the case as a homicide. News crews descended on Millbrook, telling the story of the woman who'd been hidden for 40 years. Robert Henderson was tracked down, now an old man living in Arizona under a different name. With new evidence and forensic technology, they could finally prove what everyone had suspected. He was arrested and charged with murder. But here's what made the whole town stop and stare. The night after Elizabeth's remains were removed from that basement, 3:17 a.m. came and went in silence. No screaming. For the first time in 40 years, the Henderson house was quiet. Elizabeth had finally been found. Her story had been told. She could rest now. You'd think that would be the end of it, that Danny and I would live happily in our quiet house, the mystery solved and the ghost at peace. But something else started happening, something nobody expected. Other houses in Millbrook started making noises at night, not screaming, but other sounds, crying from the old Miller place, whispering from the abandoned church on 3rd Street. It was like Elizabeth's discovery had awakened something in the town. Mrs. Chen came to visit me one evening looking troubled. 5 other people have gone missing in Millbrook over the past 60 years, she said. They were never found. Their cases went cold. And now suddenly their families are hearing things. Sounds coming from old properties. It's like they're all trying to be found now. Elizabeth showed them it was possible. I realized then that what had happened in my house wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Elizabeth's 40 years of screaming had finally paid off. She'd been heard, found, and given justice. And now, every other forgotten soul in Millbrook was doing the same thing, calling out from wherever they were hidden, begging to be discovered and remembered. The local police department started getting calls every night. Strange sounds from abandoned buildings, sensations of being watched, feelings of sadness so overwhelming that people couldn't stay in certain locations. I volunteered to help coordinate the search efforts. If I could find Elizabeth, maybe I could help find others. Maybe that was why I'd been led to this house in the first place. Over the next 3 months, we searched 5 locations where sounds had been reported. In the basement of the old Miller house, we found the remains of Timothy Miller, a teenager who disappeared in 1965. Behind a false wall in the abandoned church, we found Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's sister, missing since 1978. Each discovery was heartbreaking. Each one brought closure to families who'd spent decades wondering and hoping. And here's the strange part. Each time we found someone, the sounds from that location stopped. Just like with Elizabeth, once they were discovered and their stories told, they could rest. It was like the town itself had been holding on to these secrets, and now it was finally ready to let them go. Millbrook was healing, one found soul at a time. Danny stopped being afraid of our house. He understood now that Elizabeth hadn't been trying to scare him. She'd been asking for help the only way she could. He started leaving flowers by the spot in the basement where she'd been found. So she knows someone remembers her, he explained to me. It broke my heart and made it whole at the same time. The Henderson house got a reputation, but not the kind you'd expect. Instead of being the scary haunted house everyone avoided, it became a symbol of hope. Families with missing loved ones would come to visit, would stand in my yard and pray that their lost ones would find a voice too, would be heard and found. Our house became a place of healing instead of horror. As I'm recording this, it's been 6 months since we moved to Millbrook. The house is quiet now, peaceful. Danny is happy, making friends at school and playing in that big backyard. We've helped find 7 people who'd been missing, giving 7 families the closure they desperately needed. There are still more out there, people who vanished and were never found, buried secrets still waiting to be discovered. But I've learned something important through all of this. The real horror isn't ghosts or hauntings or things that go bump in the night. The real horror is forgetting. It's how easy it is for people to disappear and be erased from memory. It's how the world keeps spinning even when someone's gone. How life continues above while truth stays buried below. Elizabeth screamed for 40 years before anyone listened. How many others are still screaming in ways we can't hear? If you're watching this video, I want you to remember something. If you ever encounter a place that feels wrong, that sounds strange, that makes you uncomfortable in ways you can't explain, don't automatically assume it's trying to scare you. Sometimes places hold memories. Sometimes they're trying to tell you something. Sometimes what we call haunted is really just the past refusing to stay silent. Elizabeth Henderson was a real person who lived and loved and died terribly. Timothy Miller was a real teenager with dreams and friends, and a whole life ahead of him. Sarah Chen was a real woman with a family who never stopped missing her. They all found their voices, and because people listened, they found peace. That's not a horror story. That's a story about the power of being heard. The house in Texas doesn't scream anymore, but its story isn't over. Sometimes late at night I stand in the backyard and look at the stars, and I think about all the voices out there still waiting to be heard. Not just in Millbrook, but everywhere. People who vanished and were forgotten, stories that were buried, truths that were hidden. They're all still there waiting for someone to care enough to search. I used to be terrified of this house. Now I'm grateful for it. It brought me to Millbrook for a reason. It gave me a purpose beyond just surviving day to day. Danny and I aren't just living here anymore. We're honoring the people who came before us, making sure they're not forgotten, giving voice to the silent. And in doing that, we found something I never expected, a home. So if you ever find yourself in Millbrook, Texas, drive down Oakwood Drive and look at the white farmhouse at the end. It won't look scary. It won't make you uncomfortable. It'll just look like a regular house where a regular family lives. But if you know its story, if you know what happened here, you'll see it differently. You'll see it as a place where truth finally defeated lies, where persistence overcame silence, where a woman's voice echoed for 40 years until someone finally listened. And if you're really quiet, if you stand in the yard at 3:17 a.m., you won't hear screaming anymore. But you might hear something else, a whisper of gratitude, a sigh of relief, the sound of a soul finally at rest. That's the sound of justice, late but not absent. That's the sound of someone who was lost being found. That's the sound of a story that refused to be forgotten. Final message. Thank you for listening to this story. The Henderson house stands quiet now, but its message echoes loud and clear. Every person matters, every life has value, and every voice deserves to be heard, even if it takes 40 years. If you found this story moving, please subscribe to this channel for more true-feeling horror tales that explore the deeper meaning behind what scares us. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts and consider this. If you could give voice to one forgotten story, whose would it be? Remember, the scariest monsters aren't supernatural. They're the ordinary evils that let people disappear and be forgotten. But the most powerful force isn't supernatural either. It's the determination to remember, to search, to listen, and to ensure that no voice is silenced forever. This has been the story of the haunted house in Texas that still screams at night. Except now it doesn't scream anymore. Now it rests. And that's the best ending any horror story can have. Share this video. Remember Elizabeth Henderson. And never stop listening.